if you look at the hundreds and hundreds, really thousands of people who have applied for executive clemency, whether it's pardon or sentence commutation, all those pardons are posted on the pardon attorney's website. There are hundreds and hundreds. There are people who applied more than a decade ago. I have clients I've got one client who applied in 2010 and has been waiting, and he's a great case for pardon. And people have been waiting and waiting. So here we have this system. We tell people they have to go to this system, but the system doesn't work.
Over 1 million Americans face sentencing every year, and it will be the most important day of their lives. But we don't fully understand the system, how broken it is, and what we can do to make it better. I'm Doug Passon. I'm a 25-year criminal defense lawyer and a sentencing expert. My goal is to bring more awareness, more fairness, and more humanity to the sentencing process. So, are you ready? Then let's get set for sentencing. Hey everybody, Doug Passon coming to you from Studio 3553 in Scottsdale, Arizona. Welcome back to Set for Sentencing. Today, we are going to be talking about a really hot topic, as the women on The View might say, pardons and commutations, federal pardons. And I have two incredible guests on the podcast to break this all down for us. We're really going to be talking about the past, the present, and what we think it should be or will be in store for the future of the presidential pardon power. So today, joining me, our returning champion, Mark Allenbaugh. He really needs no introduction. If you don't know him, just go to sentencingstats.com, for crying out loud. And then we have Margaret Love. This is truly, truly an honor and a pleasure to have Margaret on the podcast today, because this is her specialty, her bailiwick, if you will. She is a pardon attorney. She specializes in executive clemency, restoration of rights, sentencing and corrections policy, legal and government ethics.
No.
No, that's all in your bio that we're not going to tell people to go visit.
No.
What? You're saying stop singing your praises.
Stop.
But she literally wrote the book on pardons. She's a co-author of Collateral Consequence of Criminal. I could go on and on, but here I think is the best credential that I have to mention, which is Ms. Love served as the U.S. pardon attorney between 1990 and 1997. So she didn't just have a front row seat to the pardon mobile. She was driving the bus, I think it's fair to say. So her perspective today is so valuable, and I just want to dig right in. First of all, thank you both for doing this. It's such an important topic. Welcome. All right. So I think we got this together, this motley crew of ours, when President Biden issued the pardon to Hunter, his son Hunter. And so we have a lot to talk about today, several topics. I want to talk about what you think is in store for the January 6th people, whether you think President Biden will clear federal death row, which is an issue weighing heavily on my mind because I have a couple of cases there that I've done mitigation videos for. And we want to talk about the 1,500, sounds like a TV show, but the 1,500 that got clemency recently from the president. And then most importantly, we want to talk about the future of this process. So first of all, let's just say thumbs up or thumbs down to the Hunter Biden pardon. What say you? Start with you. And by the way, your name's Margaret, but I think your friends call you Margie. Can I call you Margie?
Yeah, it's just, no, that's fine. The only reason I go by Margaret is because people mispronounce Margie. So.
Okay. Well, what do you think? Just a thumbs up. I know you have a bigger picture view of this, but just is there a on its face take that you about the Hunter pardon?
Yeah, well, I don't think very much of it, to tell you the truth. When I first heard about it, I was shocked, I think, really, and it takes a good bit to shock me about pardons. Yeah, it to say it's unusual is really an understatement. There has not been a pardon, well, there are a couple of ways that it's unusual. First of all, obviously, a president pardoning or doing any sort of executive clemency grant for a close family member, much less a child, is unprecedented, number one. Number two, doing a kind of a preemptive pardon, which is to say not just what the person is currently charged with and under, well, in one case, a trial verdict, in another case, a guilty plea. It's looking forward to anything that this person might be charged with over a very large range of time, like 10 years. And not anything that he might do in the future, but anything that he's done in the past. It basically insulated him from prosecution. That is almost unprecedented. The last example, the only example in modern times, and by modern times I mean post-Civil War, is the pardon of Richard Nixon. And that, at least, here's another way that this grant is unusual. The Nixon pardon, at least I think, has come to be viewed as having a real public purpose. There was, Ford regarded it at the time, Gerald Ford, as a way to heal the nation after a very difficult time. And I think it's come to, it was very controversial at the time, but it's come to be viewed as having a public purpose to heal the nation after a difficult time. I don't think anybody can think that the Hunter Biden had any sort of public purpose at all, the Hunter Biden pardon. So it was, I think, extremely ill-advised. That's my opinion. And it kind of knocks pardoning off its position as a part of the justice system. And by that I mean pardons really throughout our history have been used for one of the two purposes that Alexander Hamilton identified, 250 years ago. And those two purposes are sort of a justice-based, too harsh a punishment for an individual to mitigate the punishment. That's one of the purposes. And the second purpose is to have this national, what Hamilton called seasons of insurrection, where you might have a disruption, many people upset. I mean, our Civil War is a prime example. The very first pardons, the Whiskey Rebellion pardons, those are a good example where the president uses this power for a great national purpose. So those are the two kind of ways that this power has been used, and somehow we've signed certainly the Hunter Biden pardon kind of got off that center of gravity, shall we say.
So Margie, I'm just curious, can Hunter's pardon be challenged in court?
No.
By like a future prosecutor?
No.
It's
Sorry.
absolute. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, that's so fascinating. The history is fascinating too.
But just,
but
I'm sorry,
yeah,
Doug, but if I
want
could
your
just follow
take.
up on that. I mean, why could it not be challenged if there was something invalid about the pardon itself? That like, for example, as you were articulating, it's unique in the sense that it covers a very broad scope of time, and it doesn't identify any particular, I mean, it does identify a couple of particular offenses, the ones that he was convicted of, but it covers even uncharged and potentially unknown conduct, at least unknown right now, and maybe
absolutely.
In a future investigation, like a future prosecutor may discover that he was, let's just as an example, purely as an example, dealing cocaine last month, and that's not discovered for a year or two from now. Is that prosecutor precluded from challenging that the pardon as perhaps overbroad?
Well, the short answer is no. I mean, yes, they are precluded from challenging it. If it is defined, if the conduct is defined, or if the period of federal, particularly violation of federal law, is clearly defined, that any violation of federal law within that period is pardoned. Now, I will say that looks a little Like, how does he get to do that sort of thing? You know, this has
Yes.
got to be sort of illegal, right? There were questions raised at the time of the Nixon pardon
Yeah.
that perhaps, and Nixon was pardoned for anything that had happened during his presidency. There was a 5-year period that any federal offense that occurred during his 5 years of his presidency was pardoned. So nothing could go backwards. Now, obviously, you're not pardoning anything in the future, but anything that had already happened. And I think that the prosecutor in the Nixon case had some questions about whether that was valid. But I think no one challenged it. Let's put it that way. No one challenged it. There was a debate, interesting debate on the pages of the New York Times between a scholar at the University of Chicago, Phillips Kurland, and the guy who was later independent counsel in the Iran-Contra cases, who was then president of the American Bar Association. They had a big debate over whether this pardon went too far. But I mean, I suppose it could be challenged, but there have been many amnesties that pardoned uncharged conduct in our past, many particularly around the time of the Civil War. Donald Trump issued a couple that went to uncharged conduct. Michael Flynn, Arpaio, the Arizona sheriff. Both of those pardons extended to potentially unidentified conduct. For example, Flynn's pardon went to anything. Well, he had been charged with 2 offenses by the independent counsel, Robert Mueller, and his pardon went to anything else, those 2 offenses, plus anything else that the independent counsel might charge him with within his jurisdiction. So both of those were broader than simply things that had already been charged.
Let me just define some terms, because there are people that listen to this podcast that aren't deep in the weeds on this. And there's 3 terms that we've been bandying about. One is pardon, one is clemency, one is commutation. Could you just really quickly run down the differences between those 3 things?
Sure. Yeah, and it is a little confusing because the Constitution talks about pardons, the pardon power. We talk about the pardon power. But within that constitutional toolbox, if you will, there are various kinds of measures that the president can take. He can commute a prison sentence, and by that means it cuts it short. He can remit fines. He can grant a reprieve, which usually happens in a death penalty case, where you postpone the execution. In the olden days, things went much quicker and much rougher than we do these days. And so you might want to postpone the execution by, a couple of days so that somebody could get somewhere on horseback. Then there is a full pardon. And that's a pardon generally, the way it's described on the website of the Justice Department office that manages this power. It's described as a pardon after service of sentence. Now that's a kind of a shorthand for the most typical kind of pardon grant. You'll see that for those of you guys who are listening that don't understand how this pardon power works, really since the Civil War, the power has been managed by the Department of Justice. And there's a little office in the Justice Department, which I used to head, which is the Office of the Pardon Attorney. And I am, by the way, Doug, not just a pardon attorney, I was the pardon attorney.
The pardon
and
attorney.
That's an actual position in the government. It's not exactly in the Department of Justice. It's not exactly, the highest profile, most feared position, believe it or not. But the Office of the Pardon Attorney is the place that anybody who wants a pardon or wants their sentence commuted or any other kind of relief from the president, that's where they go. And they file an application, and it is investigated and vetted and looked at and written up, and it is ultimately sent through the channels of justice, which is a pretty short, actually, chain of command to the president with a recommendation. And really, since the Civil War, shortly thereafter, since there was a Department of Justice, actually, 1870, that's the way the pardon power has been managed. And for a long, long time, over 100 years, it worked pretty well to protect the president and to give the public who needed this relief, and the public that wanted to make sure that the relief was being well managed and not abused, some sense of confidence. Things kind of fell apart during the Clinton administration. And I hate to say it, but Bill Clinton was the one that kind of knocked everything off the nice balance that had been there since since shortly after the Civil War.
And I'm assuming you mean that he kind of took the decision making or the recommendation making power away from this body who gave it a lot of thought and consideration and just went off the reservation. And
well, actually, it's not quite as simple as that. He didn't take it away. The Justice Department kind of abandoned him. So that is quite
what do you mean
literally.
by that?
Huh?
What do you mean by that?
Oh, well, what I mean is that toward the end of his term, where he had not done very many pardons or commutations, he decided, as I say, late in his term, that he wanted to do pardons. He wanted to grant a lot of pardons, and he said he wanted to grant as many as Ronald Reagan had granted, which was almost 400. But he was way behind. And at that time, the Justice Department, I was no longer there. I had left at that point, and I left partly over this issue. And this issue being how well the department was responding to the president, encouraging him to do his job, to do more pardons, because there was surely going to come a time at the end of his term where he's going to want to do more pardons. But basically, starting at end of September, before he left office, the department said, we're closing our doors. We have no more recommendations. And you're on your own. So that's what I mean. And I think it was.
Why did they do that?
Because I think they thought that, frankly, and this is part of the complaint about the Justice Department's management of the pardon power, they don't think much of the pardon power. The prosecutors in the department don't think that this is really serving their interest.
Now, yeah, because they're the ones that put them in prison in the first place.
I mean, yes, I understand that. But, this worked for 100 years with the prosecutors for many of those years in the driver's seat. And they recommended hundreds and hundreds of cases every year. So I refuse to believe that it is impossible for the Justice Department not to have a kind of a better idea and a better attitude toward looking at pardon cases, certainly full pardon cases, perhaps not commutation cases. And until really the 90s, because we had a parole system until the mid 80s, and that had been implemented in, I think, in the 1920s. There were particular there weren't that many federal prisons to begin with. There were only like 4. And so when a parole system was fully put in place in the 1920s, you didn't really need the pardon power to cut prison sentences short anymore. There was also a statute. There was a statute where you could go to court with a particular case that was not parole eligible and reduce the sentence to make them parole eligible. So there were statutory mechanisms that you could substitute for the pardon power. Now, we did away with those mechanisms in the Sentencing Reform Act.
Yeah.
And so there was much more call for using the pardon power to reduce sentences.
So interesting how that dovetails into what we've been talking about on every episode about the guidelines, Mark, the one impact on the other. But I got a question for you, Margie. I've heard this time and time again, and I just want to make sure it's true. People say that when you accept a pardon, it's an admission.
No, the answer's no.
That's
I know what you're
Interesting.
gonna, I
Yeah.
know what you're gonna
People
ask.
say that accepting a pardon is an admission of guilt, and they cite
Yeah.
some Supreme Court case or something. So tell
Yes,
me, why is
yes,
the answer
there,
no?
there, there are some Supreme Court cases that have kind of peculiar things that are later sort of thought to be not right about the pardon power. Here's the thing, though. I mean, if you accept the basic sort of bureaucratic rules that the pardon attorney's office goes by, when you come in to ask for a pardon, and this I always have to tell my clients this, look, you're going back to the Justice Department. They don't want to hear you complaining about how you were treated badly by the Justice Department in your criminal case. So in most cases, they want an expression of contrition. They want acceptance of responsibility. They want basically a good attitude toward what happened to you in your criminal case. So therefore, if you look at the pardon attorney's website and the standards for pardon, you'll see that acceptance of responsibility, remorse, and atonement, those are the sort of words, these old-fashioned words, are expected of any applicant for a pardon. Now, to that extent, if you've come in looking for a pardon and that's what you're supposed to do, then yes, I mean, you probably have accepted responsibility. But there's nothing about the pardon instrument itself that necessarily implies guilt. And certainly President Trump, for example, did a number of grants that he would probably say were pardons for innocence. For example, the war crimes cases, which he didn't think that those guys who had been prosecuted for, I guess in all three of the cases, killing a foreign national on the field of battle, should have been prosecuted at all. So he thought they didn't do anything wrong. So his pardons were certainly not
Well,
given
and
the admission of guilt.
that may be a good segue into the January 6th defendants, because his take is they're innocent, they're hostages,
Yeah.
they're political prisoners. So those will be, first of all, that sounds like file that under innocence pardons, but what do you think is going to happen there?
Wow.
You got a crystal ball.
A lot of people have asked me that. First of all, I've heard Trump say at least 5 different things about what he plans to do about the January 6th cases. I've heard him say he's going to pardon them all. I've heard, and by all, I take it he means everybody who has been charged, convicted, is potentially charged. I don't know what grant of pardon looks like in that case. I would be interested to see the piece of paper or pieces of paper that would accomplish that kind of grant. Now, I've also heard him say that, of course, you know, he would do it kind of on a case-by-case basis. He's not going to grant pardon to anybody who committed violent acts against a law enforcement officer. Well, gosh, there are quite a few of them, I think. So how do you sort all these out?
Yeah.
So I mean, honestly, I think that's one of the more interesting questions to ask right now. He certainly does. I would be surprised if he intended to go through the Justice Department to identify cases, but who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe he's got people working all along to identify cases. I've heard the number 1,527 cases.
Wow.
And that's how many, I guess, have been charged. But
Well,
surprisingly, there's still a lot that haven't been charged, I think.
Well, then here's the next question. So Trump could be one of those people, or was one of those people, that was charged in connection with that day. My first question, I guess, would be, do you think Biden should pardon Trump? My next question would be, look at the look on your face, but remember national seasons of insurrection, like national healing, bleep, blop, bloop, you know? And then if I can tell by the look on your face, if you guys are just listening to this podcast, you should have been on the YouTube, because it was like there was a whiff of bad cheese in the room. But okay, so I'll let you answer that. But my follow-up question, just so you can mull it over, can Trump pardon himself?
No, and
Who
no.
says who? All right, no and no. So let's start with President Biden pardoning in this national season of insurrection for national healing. Donald Trump. No. Why? Why no?
Pardon him of what?
Well, he got charged in the DC case. He's charged in
Well, they've already abandoned those prosecutions. I mean, why should he do anything about those?
well, couldn't they come back potentially?
Gee, I don't know. What's the statute of limitations on those
Oh, yeah,
cases?
the statute of limitations on all of them are 5 years, but I do not believe that
Oh, I
the
think it's
case
7. It's
really.
not. I thought it was 7, but all right,
Yeah,
5 or 7.
yeah, but I don't think any of them have been dismissed with prejudice, so they could come back. And as a matter of fact, I think the Florida one with the documents that he stole, that well, it was on appeal, and I know the Department of Justice did move. I think now it's coming back. The Department of Justice moved in both cases, in DC and the Florida case, to dismiss, but without prejudice. So it's still open. Those could come back.
And they have not been dismissed, I take it, to date.
No, they have. They were dismissed.
I
They
see.
were,
Okay.
yeah, but without prejudice. So
Yeah. No, I hear you.
yeah,
Should he pardon Trump? No.
yeah.
The answer to that, I don't know on what basis he would pardon Trump and what it would accomplish.
National
I doubt
healing? No, I
it.
don't know.
Yeah, I think
We need
that's
a lot
gas
of
on the-
healing. We need a lot of
Right,
healing.
right.
Well, what's that? Here, look, I mean, we're all into transactions. What does he get in return?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I don't know. Everybody seems to be, kissing the ring, and so I'm not advocating
Why
for
should
it. I
Biden
don't
kiss a
think
ring?
I don't think he should. I'm certainly not advocating
Well,
for it.
one of
but-
the transactions, but I mean, thinking, you're right, Doug. It is transactional, unfortunately, the way pardons have turned into. But one of the things that Biden might negotiate with is you're not going to, I know I pardoned my son, but since you don't tend to follow the law, Trump and whoever's going to be your attorney general, whether it's Pam Bondi or somebody else, they may end up going after Hunter anyway. So this could be like a belt and suspenders. Look, I'm going to pardon my son, but I'm also going to pardon Trump in exchange for him not going after Hunter
Yeah.
and
Or
ignoring my
not
pardon.
going after all of the Liz Cheneys of the world who
Oh,
he says
exactly.
are
Yeah,
gonna-
that too.
are gonna
Oh,
pay
yeah,
the
we
price.
could get Kash Patel's appendix and we'll just
Uh-huh.
say,
Oh, yeah.
we'll
Yeah.
attach that to a brief document and say,
There.
oh, come
Yeah.
on, fellas, this is insane.
Well, I'm not advocating for it. I'm not.
I know you aren't. I
Yeah.
know you aren't. But the very fact that you are suggesting it, seriously, and I'm not criticizing you at all for suggesting it. I mean, suggest that we are really in a Alice in Wonderland world.
Oh, yeah. Without a doubt.
That
Without a
is
We
doubt.
are
just
down
kind
the
of,
rabbit hole.
yeah.
We are
makes me
down.
wonder if we're ever going to get out of it. I mean, it's just, this is a rabbit hole that it is something that is just, it looks to me like, well, I don't know what it looks like. It's a very strange place to be in, and very ahistorical. I mean, we have never been in a place like this before
Yeah.
in our country.
Well, let's keep going because I know I've got you for just a little while longer, and I have some more burning questions. I am going to be deeply troubled with our current president if he doesn't commute the sentences of those sitting in death row on Terre Haute. There's there are 56 of them or something.
Oh, is there that many? I've heard 40.
I'll take your word for it. But there's a lot of folks who are on death row in Terre Haute for federal death penalty crimes, and everybody's waiting to see what the president is going to do. He certainly suggested, if not outright said, he doesn't want the federal death penalty, and that he could, with a stroke of his pen, commute all those sentences to life without possibility of parole and spare their lives. And especially,
I earnestly hope that he will do that. All of them. And I hope he will do them as a class. And if he doesn't do all of them, Doug, I hope he will at least do the ones who have exhausted their judicial remedies and will certainly, he said it, so believe him, be executed by Trump as quickly as he can when he comes into office. So,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
we
mean,
don't have to guess about that because he did it last time.
no, yes, exactly.
He
And
went on a
so,
killing spree.
I mean, my
Mm.
feeling is that if Biden doesn't do at least those, he's responsible for their death, all of them, because Trump has said he's going to do it, and Biden's in a position to stop him.
Yeah. And lay people who listen to this say, why on earth should they have their sentences commuted? They committed horrible crimes. The law is there's a federal death penalty. They got it. Why are you asking for this? And the truth is, a lot of these cases go back to Hamilton's first reason for the pardon power in the first, or this power in the first place, is the sentences are too harsh.
Right.
There are some people on death row who probably their acts were heinous enough that a death penalty is warranted, but there are a lot there that weren't. That it was terrible lawyering, that it was systemic racism, that it
Yeah.
was lying, corruption, you name it. All the things that result in, if not wrongful convictions outright. In other words, are there innocent people there, but just should never have gotten the death penalty? But, there's a series of problems with these cases that I don't think the public ever really understands. I don't know if they would care if they did understand.
Listen, look, you are totally preaching to the choir. My daughter
Yes.
does this work. She's now back in the federal system. She's in that little office that does all the policy advising for the capitalist habeas units across the country in the federal defender offices.
I got to
So
get her on this podcast. Give me
huh?
her number. I got to get her on this cast.
No. Get her boss on your podcast. Except Ruth is retiring. I'm not sure when, but
Yeah.
her going away party is, I think, today actually.
Okay.
So yeah, because Jenny had to go down there. But this is a little personal information. But no, I'm very familiar with that, and I hope also that whatever he does, he does not start picking and choosing in either of those categories. He can do all of the row. He can clear the row, as they say, lovely phrase, or he can take the ones that have exhausted their remedies, who would be up for execution, and do all of them. But as you say, look, I mean, there are a lot of people there who committed crimes that most people, everybody, I would hope, regarded as pretty doggone serious crimes.
Yeah.
And all of them involve some kind of killing, whether it's that they pulled the trigger and they were the shooter, or whether they were simply along for the ride and somebody else shot them. So it's or killed them in some fashion. So yes, they're very serious crimes. So you have to describe them, unlike the home confinement cases, which.
Well, I want to get there, but it occurs to me, I got to circle back and drill down, because I didn't get a good explanation on, you said, I asked you, can Trump pardon himself? You said no. And I'm just wondering, is there law on that? Is that your opinion on that? Like, why do you say no?
This is sort of in the category of prove me wrong if you can. No, there's no law on it. People have written a lot on it, and for the most part, it's a kind of a king's two bodies kind of argument that you can't use the power to benefit yourself directly. But these are all kind of abstract arguments.
But so would it be subject to challenge? Going back to my original question, if Trump were to pardon himself, is that beyond judicial review?
No, of course it's not.
Okay.
No, and I'd say something else, Mark. Here's another thing that you might find interesting. I mean, there are limits on the pardon power. In addition to, obviously you can't pardon the president can't pardon state cases.
Correct.
State
right.
crimes. Right. Okay, so I would say if the president took money for a pardon, for example, would that invalidate the pardon? No, probably not. However, the president might be subject to prosecution or impeachment for having taken a bribe to grant a pardon. Probably doesn't invalidate the pardon itself. But I mean, there was a lot of talk about self-pardons at the end of Trump Trump's
Right.
administration.
Yeah.
I don't know if there was ever any talk about it at the end of Nixon, but I mean, we're just in a whole totally different world here.
Right. So it's a
And
hypothetical, but it's not a terribly
right.
crazy one, given that anything goes at this
Well,
point.
it's
But
not
can I ask
crazy, and I've
ask
heard
a
some people say, why
yeah.
not
Can
give
I
it a
ask
go?
this may be a little in the weeds, but Mark asks, is this up for challenge? You say yes. Who has standing to challenge that? Who brings that challenge?
A federal prosecutor.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
what are the odds of that happening in at least in his
Well,
administration?
not in his administration for sure.
Okay. So,
Well, I mean, wait, but every U.S. attorney's office is its own fiefdom, and not all Republicans are beholden to Trump, as we saw with Liz Cheney and Adam. What's his name? I forgot the other guy's name, but
Henson.
you don't think Cash Patel, whoever's going to be Pam Bondi, the new
yeah,
AG,
but
would
Pam
have them
Bondi,
fired in a hot minute?
No, wait a minute. What are you talking about? Are you talking about Biden pardoning himself?
no, I'm
No,
talking
I'm
about
talking about Trump pardoning
Trump
himself.
Well, wait a
pardoning
minute.
himself.
He's not going to do that till the end of his term.
Well,
Well, when's the
who
end of his
knows?
term?
Who knows? He could start out by just saying, "I'm
Well,
putting all this other BS behind us. I'm done with it." I don't know, but I
yeah.
guess we better move on because I
Well,
gotta
but I do have a really good, important question, Doug, if I could. And
please.
this actually has to do with, at the pardon office itself, the standards for considering commutation of petitions. I'm on the pardon website right now, and the entire section of the pardon attorney's manual for the standards for considering commutations boils down to like 7 paragraphs, and really only like one of the paragraphs really discusses what's considered towards a grant of commutation. And Margie, I'm hoping you're going to tell us that that really isn't all there is, that there has to be some type of substantive manual or something that the people in the pardon attorney's office are actually looking through and did look through and had these criteria and applied them to all these applications for these 1,500, for example, that Biden just
No,
granted.
no. The 1,500
Yes.
were done as a class.
Yeah, as a class. But I mean, there had to have been some type of criteria.
No, there was no criterion. Now you're talking about why did they go to home confinement look, these were done
Well,
as
I know why they went to home confinement, but I mean, yeah. So I think what a lot of people miss with the 1,500 is they were already on home confinement because of the Bureau of Prisons. It had nothing to do with Biden.
Yeah.
The Bureau of Prisons.
I said
Yeah.
in an earlier interview, I think to CNN or something, that look, if people had a complaint that these guys, or the big fraudster, or the kids for cash for kids,
Yeah.
whatever, judge, were on home confinement to begin with, they should have complained 4 years ago.
Right. Exactly. During the height of the pandemic, and a lot of these
Okay, but
people.
by the way, yeah, go. I
But
think
just to
what
get
you're
back.
gonna say,
Yeah.
but you should say it because people need to understand there was a real BOP doesn't release people to home confinement willy-nilly. If they're
Yeah.
releasing you to home confinement, they presumably have good reason. So this is COVID.
Yeah, you're not likely
Yes.
to commit another crime,
You're
which
not.
suggests that all the white
Yeah.
fraudsters get to go home, no matter how long their sentences are, and the black drug dealers
Yeah.
can
Well,
stay in prison.
right. But isn't it age and your susceptibility to getting COVID and all those things? Wasn't that a factor for these were COVID home confinements, right?
Yeah.
They were people. Well, yeah, but I mean, I remember there were some criteria that I saw, but I mean,
Well,
these were done.
there were significant criteria. There are 2, maybe 3 memoranda that the BOP had issued in terms of evaluating inmates for home confinement, for transfer to home confinement. And by the way, when they were on home confinement, support for people to understand that they were still under BOP custody. They were still technically in prison. They were, and they
being
could have been revoked
supervised.
But
Having
Mark,
restrictions on liberty.
but they could have been revoked at any time.
They were not, yeah, I know it, but they were not under any real restrictions for what they could do on a day-to-day basis. They were going to work, they were going to the movies, they were going to the beach, They had
Going
very
to the
few.
movies, I don't know about people that were on home confinement allowed to.
No, that's what I understand, that
Mark,
at this
to
point, there was
to
very little supervision being done.
to Margie's point, and I never considered it, but
Yeah.
it's dead on. Can you get stats on the racial composition of that 1,500? Because I think that would be super fascinating to know.
Well, well, I don't know. I don't know. See, now I don't know, for example, Doug, I don't know, and I don't think anybody from the press has asked, were all 1,499, I think that's the number that came
Yeah.
up, plus the 91 that he did earlier. Because
Yeah.
that was the other thing. There were a bunch of commutations that he did in his first 2 years that almost all were home confinement people.
Mm-hmm.
Almost
Well,
all.
all 1,499 were already on home
I'm
confinement.
talking about the 137 that he did earlier,
Sorry.
of which 91
Mm.
were home confinement cases, and 13 more were national security commutations. In other words, spy swap cases. People
Yeah.
who we were holding, Iranians, for example, that we swapped to Iran for our nationals that Iran was holding, or Venezuela, or Russia, or whatever. And so almost all of the 137 grants that he did before the big home confinement tranche were also home confinement cases, which suggests to me it's a pretty thin gruel of this great constitutional power. And that's why I've made these kind of sarcastic comments about this is the president as janitor. And if you're going to use the president to clean up the system, he's going to get what he's probably going to get, which is in trouble. And I mean, that's what really kills me, that the president's power has been trivialized to such an extent. It's used for all kinds of, sort of, it's the dumping ground for all these kind of little problems. Things like, for example, guns. If you have a federal felony conviction, it doesn't matter how long ago, it doesn't matter what it was for. You could have had a false statement or cheated on your taxes in 1982, and you still can't go hunting.
Yeah.
And you have to get a pardon before you can get near a gun again.
Yeah.
And so
you wrote an op-ed yesterday, or a letter to the Washington Post, and you said Congress has its share of the blame. They could be codifying these things into law and changing the structure of it all, and
well, sure,
taking the janitorial function away from the president.
Of course. And in fact, there's already a law, Doug. This is the ironic thing that
Oh yeah, the ATF won't fund it to review the
Congress
restoration of
said
rights.
33 years ago, we're not funding ATF anymore.
Yeah.
And that's a kind of a funny way to legislate, tell you the truth. And that went up to the Supreme Court too. And somebody challenged, the firearms dealer in Mexico challenged that way of legislating. You can't just pull funds from the agency and say, okay, now they can't do it.
It's pretty interesting given how much we love our guns in this country. But listen, I know I'm about to lose you, and I want to give you the last word, because circling back to where we started, which was Hunter Biden, you said this really gives us an opportunity to have a larger conversation about how the presidential pardon power ought to be managed going forward. And I want to know your thoughts on that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the hundreds and hundreds, really thousands, of people who have applied for executive clemency, whether it's pardon or sentence commutation, all those pardons are posted on the pardon attorney's website. There are hundreds and hundreds. There are people who applied more than a decade ago. I've got one client who applied in 2010. Wow. And has been waiting, and he's a great case for pardon. And people have been waiting and waiting. So here we have this system. We tell people they have to go to this system, but the system doesn't work. The system is not delivering recommendations to the president. it is not encouraging the president to use the system. Now, I could say that before these most recent grants, not only I could say, I would be right, that President Biden was the stingiest president in history, the stingiest one-term president in history, full-term president. He did almost no pardons. And where is the Department of Justice in saying, look, we have this program and we think you should use it? Or where is the White House saying, gosh, we've done a few pardons, but how does this work? What's going on over there? The Attorney General, Merrick Garland. I worked for Merrick when I was pardon attorney, and he was in the Deputy Attorney General's office. Merrick knows how this system works. I have heard that there are hundreds of favorable recommendations sitting at the White House awaiting action. That's on the White House. If that's true, why doesn't the White House do more of these grants? So we have a lot of problems with this ordinary system. And then we have the problem on top of that, which is that we don't really have statutory remedies. States have done a pretty good job in developing statutory remedies for people not only to reduce their sentences, but also, importantly, to reduce the collateral consequences of conviction after the sentence is served. You've got record sealing, you've got judicial certificates, you've got all kinds of different, you have fair employment, and fair chance licensing laws, all kinds of different statutory approaches. And certainly the courts in most states can give firearms rights back because you have a twin system. You've got the federal system, you've got the state system. So why doesn't Congress learn from the states and take some of the business away from the president? Why doesn't the president say, I'm tired of operating like a janitor in this system? So I would like to please be able to use my power in a meaningful way without having all this, dreck put on my plate, which really shouldn't be on my plate. And so, I just think we have to think about this stuff. Ironically, I think that these January 6th pardons are in a way a kind of a classic example of what the president ought to be thinking about doing with his great constitutional power. Now, you can disagree about the merits, but at least that is a real expression of what incoming President Trump wants to do with his constitutional power. And let him do it, however he's going to do it, and let him face the music of the public that may disagree with some of the violent people who attacked and in a couple of cases killed police officers. And how do we like that? How does the American public like that? Let's see. And he may not do everybody. Who knows? I absolutely know. I have no crystal ball, no idea what he's going to do. If I were advising him, I'd probably say, do everybody. Don't pick and choose, because there are lots of bad cases in here. You don't want to be picking and choosing.
Yeah.
So, but of course, I could have said that in the home confinement cases, but it still should have been vetted, and some of these stinkers should have been identified and pulled out. So, but anyway, it's a very, very interesting time. And I do get a little discouraged about whether we're going to be able to fix it. But sometimes you have to, if you've got a real bad situation, a pretty dysfunctional situation, you've got to hit bottom before you can decide that you want to recover. And the analogy out of, a 12-step kind of a program has not been far from my mind through all this.
Which is what you have to first admit that you have a problem before you can get
Well, there you go.
help.
Good, Doug. That's great. That's great. Yes.
Well, and I'd love to be hopeful about this, but if you're pinning your hopes to Congress for any meaningful legislation, boy, I'm not sure. We'll see. They did give us the First Step Act last time at Trump, so
yes, they did.
You just never know. But
whatever.
Well,
and here's another thing, Doug. I don't understand why the Department of Justice has dragged its feet in dealing with these First Step Act cases. because that is the statutory relief mechanism for the president's pardon power. And it occurs to me, why hasn't the president picked up the phone and said, Mr. Attorney General, Merrick, sir, why are your prosecutors being so resistant to sentence reduction motions?
Yeah.
Right.
Tell them to get on the program.
Amen.
Right.
Amen. Yeah.
Yep.
Now, if you meet a judge that still won't do it after the government has urged him to do it, then you can take that case to the clemency power.
I mean, for that matter, why doesn't he get on the phone with Director Peters of the Bureau of Prisons and say,
Right.
you got staffing problems, you're overcrowded, your budget sucks, get some of these people out. You can do
Perfect.
you don't have to wait for the judge or the DOJ.
Right.
Get
What
off,
are you talking
do
about?
it.
How do you think that the director of BOP has any power to get people out?
They
Well,
can
he
do
does by
compassionate release
statute. Yeah.
on their own, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
oh, well, I
And if
mean,
the
yeah.
warden doesn't do it or doesn't respond, then you go to
Right.
court.
Well, don't
Right.
forget that BOP works for the Attorney General. And
Yes.
the Attorney General, the buck stops here. And the
Yeah.
buck stops on the 5th floor of Main Justice. And that's where the Attorney General lives, and he should be doing something about
Well,
this.
then he needs to have a little three-way call with Merrick Garland and Colette Peters and get some action going.
Yeah.
But
Well, look, I mean, a long time ago, it's really interesting. Mark, you'll be happy to hear this. A long, long time ago, I remember I took a case into Phil Hyman when he was Deputy Attorney General. He's a great guy, and I wanted him to pass a recommendation to the White House that we would commute the sentence of this sick old guy that looked like he was close to death. And Phil said to me, he said, look, why should we ask the president to do something that we can do ourselves? And I have never forgotten that, because
I like that.
the department could do that.
Yeah.
They could do it even then, before there was a First Step Act.
Yeah.
And I remember Phil called Kathy Hawk, who was then director of BOP, into the main conference room in the deputy's office and said, what's going on here? And then, of course, Phil got fired, which was very sad, because he might have been able to fix something. But that's the problem. Why should the Justice Department be asking the president to do something with this great constitutional power that they can do themselves?
Right.
well,
Right.
it speaks to, and I think this is where we'll land the plane, but in my opinion, when you look at the injustices in the system, none of it makes sense except in the light of finality. In other words, there's this overarching mantra that convictions should be final and we shouldn't be going back and overturning and overlooking and pardoning, blah, blah, blah. It is what it is.
I don't know where
The
that
court
came
system
from.
it comes from nowhere.
It comes from
And it
nowhere.
is, especially when you think about, like you said, the people on the row who've exhausted their rights, a lot of them because of procedural, defects, not substantive. That's how innocent people get sentenced to death. And if we have such a love affair with finality in our court systems, that does make the president the final arbiter. Call him a janitor if you will,
Yeah,
but our system
I like
is a
calling him a
mess.
janitor.
Yeah, but our system is broken and the janitor has to fix it. That's the last hope for these people. And so I really hope President Biden does the right thing when it comes to especially when it comes to death row. So we will just have to wait and see. We've got a couple more weeks. I think this podcast episode will drop in the first of the year, so he'll still have a week or two left. But my hope is by the time this episode airs, that decision is made and it's the right one. But for now, I just wanted to say thank you again, Margaret Love, a former pardon attorney extraordinaire. Your perspective was so valuable today. Thank you. And Mark, I always love having you on there. We didn't get to some of the stats, but we'll get there next time. But thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you to both of you. It's always fun.
This was
Okay.
fun.
Okay, Margie, good to see you. Thank you.
Okay. Bye,
Okay.
guys.
Bye.
Take care.
Mark, you're gonna stay on. I got to talk to you about. Okay.
Yeah.
If we're gonna keep talking about this, I guess we'd call this bonus content.
Yeah, bonus content. Yeah,
After hours.
Right. One of the things I did want to speak to Margie a little bit more about was the lack of guidelines that the pardon attorney's office has with respect to commutations, either on an individual level or as a class. And commutations, presidential commutations, basically are a flavor of compassionate release. And as we were kind of alluding to towards the end there, there is a whole now well-developed area of law that developed actually very quickly. Compassionate release was almost unknown prior to the First Step Act. And then it kind of started growing a tiny bit, but then once the pandemic hit, boom, it blew up into a whole, not cottage industry, but an industry, if you will.
Yeah.
And so now it's a well-developed area of criminal law, of sentencing law. And it seems that that is something that the pardon attorney's office could learn from and it itself advocate for institutions like even the Sentencing Commission about getting judges and the Department of Justice to do the cleanup first, rather than, as Margie was saying, having the president act as a janitor, when all of these commutations really should have occurred much earlier down the line in a much more systemic way. And you asked me the question, do we have the stats on the race and sex of everybody that was given a commutation? No, but that's something that Darren and I will work on now. Is
Yeah.
we can get all that information, and it will be interesting to see, what the makeup of every person was. And my guess is we may not see anything. Here's what my guess is: those 1,499 individuals pretty much were the bulk of everybody that was on home confinement and had a clean record. There was probably very, very few criteria that went in to getting a commutation for them.
Yeah.
But one of the things we did, so why grant the commutation if they're on home confinement and all this stuff? And this is something that we did get into, is I thought that the motivation was that Biden did not want to leave the possibility to Trump for revoking all of their home confinement and bringing them back.
Yeah.
And that was a real possibility that would happen.
That's what I was thinking too. These folks have been out since COVID, we're 4 years down the road, and they've been still under BOP supervision, still on home confinement, still suffering a consequence. It's not prison, but it's not nothing. And they've been living sort of in fear, because at any moment they could say, yeah, you got to go back. In fact, I don't even know if they need a reason. So yeah, I think that's exactly right. These folks have, more importantly, this is proven, and Walt talks about this a lot, that this has proven to be a system that works. That the people they let out, they're not causing problems, they're not reoffending.
Right.
It's reduced the cost, of housing them. This is something that should be done more. And these guys were almost like test case, proof of concept, if you will. And why would you ever want to throw these people back in prison for no good reason? And more importantly,
especially an overcrowded system.
Yeah, do this more.
And they're closing institutions. 6 prisons were just closed, last week. And
but by the way, this speaks to, and Margie's not here to defend herself, but she said that they shouldn't have done a commutation of the 1,499, 1,500 people, that they should have vetted it better. And one of the case studies or textbook examples she uses is this judge, who his name was Michael Conahan.
Right.
And I'll admit, when I heard he was, got a commutation, first of all, I didn't put 2 and 2 together. It was one of these COVID home confinement commutate blanket. I thought Biden specifically commuted sentence, and I was mad, but that's not the case. But this guy is the worst of the worst in terms of, he may be a white collar offender, but what was his white collar crime? Taking money under the table to send juveniles. This is a judge.
Yeah.
So to sentence juveniles to this particular private juvenile detention facility. So he's throwing kids in jail and making a profit off it. And that is fucked up.
Yeah.
But this speaks to the same situation we had when Professor Pope has been on social media, who wrote "Fool Me Once." I'm going to give her a
Right.
plug because I have the book right here, and she's not here to defend herself either. But we've had talks with Kelly. In fact, we're both in this book. You know that, right?
Yep.
We're in
Yes.
this book because this is a story of Rita Crundwell, who was the comptroller for I think the city was Dixon, a small city in Illinois, small town, and she was robbing them blind for years to the tune of millions and millions of dollars. And I think she got like a 20-year sentence. And when COVID hit and she got home confinement, the doo-doo hit the fan because people thought justice wasn't served. And we had this whole conversation with her about how,
Mm.
yeah, she really did serve a lot of time of her sentence, especially compared to most people in the similar white collar bracket.
Right.
And this is not the huge injustice that you make it out to be if you look at
Right.
the big picture.
Right.
Now, you did some stats on the judge, and you could pretty much make the same argument for him, right?
Yeah, yeah, he did. I mean, everyone, and I have seen other articles on the AP and stuff that people are upset about that, but you got to look at the case. I mean, he got a 210-month sentence, which was about twice what people would generally get today for having the exact same guideline calculation. In other words, he was sentenced twice as harsh as someone similarly situated, as we would say, and he ended up doing as much time as someone similarly situated would do anyway. Already,
Yeah.
he's already done that time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he ended up. What did I have here? He ended up serving about 105 months before he was transferred to home confinement. Uh, and he was transferred to home confinement because of the pandemic and stuff.
Mhm.
And the pardon will release him from home confinement on December 22nd of this year. So, in a couple of days. But as a result, he's still going to end up doing more time when you combine all of his time in. He started serving his sentence back in September of 2011. So from 2011 until now, he's going to end up doing about, what was it, 159. I'm sorry, what was it? Yep, the equivalent of a 159-month sentence
Yeah.
is what he will have ended up doing, and that's more than what people get for
Yeah.
kidnapping. So
Yeah.
the point is, he's
And
done
child pornography and a
and
bunch of
child
other things
pornographers.
you mentioned.
Yeah,
Right.
and much more time. The average sentence for somebody with child pornography is only 100 months,
Yeah.
which is significant. I mean, I'm not saying a 100-month sentence is a
Yeah.
small sentence,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
huge, but he's done more than that. So he's not getting any bit of a
Yeah.
break,
Right. Yeah.
So
So my
anyway,
initial gut
stats are good.
reaction, because I was so angry at him for what he did, which
Yeah.
is a huge internal conflict because I'm the consummate defense lawyer and I like to see the good in everyone, but that was a horrible crime, way, way worse than Rita Crundwell's, in my opinion. But I'm okay with it. I think,
Yeah.
listen, this speaks to the fundamental defect in the system that we talk about all the time, which is too much time right off the bat.
Yeah, too
We
much time.
over sentence, over incarcerate because of what? Broken ass guidelines.
Yep.
With these things that result in these ridiculously disproportionate sentences.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so he did, listen, it's a 72-year-old man.
Yeah.
Think of the hell he went through for those 7, 8, 9 years that he was in custody.
Yeah.
And, I think a lot of people will be like, we just want him to die in prison. We want Rita Crundwell to die in prison for their crimes. And I think we got to chill out a little bit about that. That's what I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
And then I guess there was one other thing that I wanted to. Okay. Well, I never got my say on Hunter Biden's pardon,
Here it goes. Okay.
and I would have asked Margie this, and I'll
Yeah.
ask you this
Yeah.
too.
Okay.
You're the president.
Yeah.
President Mark Allenbaugh,
Yeah.
and you got kids. I got kids. They're teenagers. They're in college. They do a lot of stupid shit. Now, Hunter was a grown ass man, but he's
Yeah.
been through some really, really terrible trauma in his life. And, we don't
Sure.
have to go into it, but he had a very bad substance abuse problem.
Yep.
And most, if not all of this conduct happened kind of in the throes of that. And if you had the power, President Allenbaugh, your child, who you love more than life itself, has done some crazy crap. Nobody got hurt except for him with all the
Mhm.
drugs he put in his body and the whores he slept with. But nobody got hurt, nobody got killed. He's turned his life around. He's on the right track. You're a dad now. You're a president, but you're a dad, and you're probably a dad first, president second. I am. I'm giving my kid a pardon. I don't give a fuck what people say. That is my son. I
Yeah.
have the ultimate power. So, Mark, if you had the ultimate power to
Yeah.
make your son's problems go away, no matter what that problem is,
Yeah.
would you do it?
Hell no, I would not do it. What I would do is I get on the phone with Mark and Doug immediately and make sure that he was represented by the best people and to get the lowest sentence possible at the at
You're
the best possible
telling me
place.
you wouldn't
Hell
pardon
no,
your
Doug,
own
no,
child? You are
no
heartless. I bet Margie
way,
wouldn't
no,
either.
no,
Well,
because
maybe
in
your
that
children
in
are
that
so perfect you just can't
because
envision a
my
scenario where
my
you'd have
pardon
to.
no because my this is more the philosopher in me, but my pardon power doesn't stem from the fact that I'm a father. It stems from the fact that I'm president, and to me it would be an abuse of my position as president to use that pardon power for personal means. It'd be like pardoning myself, and that would be, I think, in a professional abuse of my discretion. And obviously, it would just reek of nepotism and what have you. Now, would I protest it after I was president? Hell yeah. Would I say, look, if
Well,
it
what
wasn't for the
good's that
fact
gonna do?
but
That and $4 will get me a cup of coffee at Starbucks.
well,
He's done. When he's done, he's done. He
yeah,
can
but he's
protest
not.
all
But
he
the point is,
wants.
but I would know that in the hands of Mark and Doug, that he is not going to do any significant time. So, and he would be well represented, and his story is going to be told, and the judge is going to understand too that this was, a political
Yeah.
prosecution. That's what would happen. I would not.
Okay.
Now
So,
I'll
but
put it
let's
this
break.
way,
Yeah.
but I will make one exception. Now let's just say, and I will say this to contradict myself. Like Walt Whitman, I'm complex. I could contradict myself. I'm full of complexities, or whatever he said. Anyway, if the judge ended up, I would wait for sentencing potentially, and I understand that Biden can't at this point, but I would not want to pardon if I was going to do anything like that until I saw what the sentence was. And if the sentence was something egregious like the stat max, and my son's going
Yeah.
to spend basically the rest of
But
his
he
life.
doesn't have that luxury. He can't wait. So he
Yeah,
had to do
he
it.
doesn't,
And he
yes,
did
but
it
I
in
would not.
anticipation of Hunter Biden going to jail. But I'll tell you something, putting the dad factor aside, and I
Yeah,
get you try to separate dad from office, but
yeah,
I don't think that's possible. But I also think we're in this situation now where there's double standard. One side gets to do whatever they want,
yeah.
violate all norms, all traditions, and some laws, and they don't give a fuck.
Right.
And they do what they want, consequences be damned.
That
And
doesn't give me permission to do the same,
well,
though.
I guess that's true, but we're in this situation where well, the Democrats have done this. They go low, we go high, and how's that working out for you? And if you're on the playground and the bully is continually kicking sand in your face, once in a while you got to stand up and punch him right in the fucking nuts and say, "I'm doing this, and I don't give a shit what you think." And that's, I think, part of what Biden did because he knows that if the tables were turned, Trump would do that in a hot minute.
Yeah, but yeah, that's the difference between deontology and
He-
utilitarian theories of ethics. So we can have that
wow.
other debate.
Yeah. But I'm just saying we're
Yeah.
fighting, we brought a what is that? We brought a knife, we bring knives to a gunfight. And then the
Yeah, but if you
last
have Doug and Mark, no, if you have Doug and Mark,
well,
you're bringing some heavy artillery.
but Doug and Mark aren't cheap either, so you're going to be forced to spend this money, like this aggravation, this stress, everybody who's been through a criminal prosecution knows what a terrible burden that is mentally, emotionally, physically, and financially.
Oh, by
And
the
the
way, but Doug, I'm sorry, let me ask something.
yeah,
In all seriousness,
yeah,
you and me might be the reason why Hunter got into this shit.
really?
Remember our podcast? Yes, remember our podcast right before he was when things started going south in Delaware.
Yeah, with his
and the judge
diversion.
started questioning stuff. We were the ones, I think we were one of the first people to get on a podcast and start saying, yeah, the judge is right. This is kind of bullshit with all the went with the diversion agreement that he had, and
Well,
start questioning that. And that
I
was,
hope we're not to blame for
I
that.
know, but
But given our massive following, 1 million listeners. But I wanted one more point because you raised it. You
okay.
mentioned that you think these prosecutions were political.
Yeah.
Isn't that the best reason to give him a pardon? To say if
No.
his name wasn't Hunter Biden, he would never have been targeted in the way he was. He would have never had people trying to tank this diversion plea in Delaware. He would have had this in the rearview mirror by now.
Yeah. You
Why?
know,
No, that's a
because
great
because
reason.
I think most prosecutions are political. I think the whole disparity between powder cocaine and crack cocaine,
Great.
those were
Commute all
political.
those then too. I
I'm
mean,
sorry.
I said great. Commute all those senses
Oh
too.
yeah, but
That's the
and
janitorial. That's
Obama
the
did,
janitorial function.
and Obama did. Yeah,
Yeah.
but he had to act as a
Right.
janitor. Yeah.
Right. He did. That's the quintessential
Yeah.
example of janitorial, the
Yes.
janitorial aspect of part. I think I've got a name for this podcast title for the janitor, the pardon I don't know.
Yeah, we'll
Well,
have to work on that a little.
anyway, I'm glad you looked up the stats for the judge. And, I think we've exhausted this topic, but I'm glad we got little bonus content. I'll just tack this on at the end. So thank you.
Very good.
That's it for today, but before we go, I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you to you, the listener, for spending time with us today getting set for sentencing. Whether you're a lawyer, someone who could use the help, or maybe you're just a true crime buff who loves the inside scoop on how this whole thing works, I am so glad you're here, and I hope you keep listening. If you're interested in knowing more about what I do, mitigation videos, case consults, live teaching, on-demand educational content, books, articles, all of it, please visit www.dougpassenlaw.com. I'm Doug Passon. Until next time, hang in there. Wait a minute, that's a stupid way to sign off a podcast about sentencing. Hang in there. What's the matter with you, man? I guess they call that gallows humor. Sorry. All right. Well, I will see you next time on Set for Sentencing. Bye-bye.